Nestled between the rolling hills and vast stretches of emerald-green plains, the village of Ife was a place that seemed untouched by time. The air always smelled of earth and fresh rain, mingling with the sweet scent of wildflowers that dotted the landscape. Majestic trees, their branches heavy with fruits and shaded leaves, towered over the houses, providing a natural canopy of green that offered shelter from the fierce sun during the long, dry season. The heart of the village was a vibrant mix of old stone homes with thatched roofs, simple yet deeply rooted in tradition. Each household was a small community of its own, with sprawling gardens full of crops and plants that were grown and harvested by the families themselves. Every corner of Ife village pulsed with life. Children ran and played, their laughter mingling with the rhythmic sounds of drums echoing from the village square, where preparations for the next festival were already underway. The people of Ife were deeply connected to the land, and their lives were governed by the cycles of nature. There was a sense of harmony that wrapped the village in a blanket of peace. Festivals, often marked by colorful dances, storytelling, and the exchange of gifts, were a central part of their way of life. The elders would recount ancient stories, passing down their wisdom to the younger generations. Despite the vibrant community, Ife was a place where strict traditions held sway, particularly when it came to the roles of men and women. Women were expected to marry, bear children, and uphold the family's honor. Their worth was often measured by their ability to manage a home and their relationship with their husbands. Men, on the other hand, were seen as the head of the household, responsible for providing for their families and maintaining social ties with the wider village. There was an unspoken rule that the choices one made, especially when it came to marriage, had far-reaching consequences for the family's reputation and standing within the community. The village also had its darker undertones, a political landscape often shaped by power struggles between noble families. Rumors of an ancient prophecy persisted, one that spoke of a woman who would change the fate of the village, a woman who would either save them from their downfall or lead them into ruin. Some believed the prophecy was nothing more than a myth, while others whispered that the fate of Ife rested in the hands of a chosen one. Amma grew up within the well-respected family of Okoro, a family known throughout Ife for their unwavering adherence to tradition. Her father, a respected elder, was a man of few words but vast wisdom, while her mother had been a woman of unparalleled grace, her knowledge of herbs and healing passed down through the generations. From a young age, Amma was taught the values of respect, duty, and sacrifice. She learned how to manage a household, how to honor the ancestors, and the importance of upholding the family name. Amma was a beautiful girl, known for her radiant smile and striking eyes that mirrored the calm lakes in the surrounding countryside. But beneath her beauty lay a sharp mind and a spirit that was anything but docile. While her friends would quietly accept the roles they were assigned by their families, Amma felt the weight of her destiny, and it was not one she had chosen for herself. As a child, she had dreams that stretched beyond the village. She longed to experience the world, to see places where the sun set in colors she had never seen and hear languages she had never heard. She yearned for freedom, for a life where she could choose her own path, but her upbringing made it clear that her duty was to her family and her village. Despite the strong will that burned inside her, Amma's life had always been one of compliance. She lived in the shadow of her family's legacy. Amma's independence was not celebrated in the village. There was only one path for a woman: to marry well, support her husband, and bear children. Her beauty, while admired, had become a burden, for it meant that every man in the village would seek her hand in marriage. But none of the suitors ever made her heart race with excitement. Instead, she felt suffocated by their expectations, boxed into a life she did not choose. Her heart longed for something more, but it seemed the world had no space for her dreams. Her family, too, placed pressure on her. Her father, though kind, had always seen marriage as a means to strengthen the family's name and status. The political climate of Ife, with its ongoing tensions between noble families, further exacerbated the stakes of her marriage. Amma's family, particularly her mother, believed that a match with Olu, son of the powerful Ise family, would solidify their position within the village in the greater kingdom. Amma's parents were adamant in their desire to see her marry Olu, despite his rumored condition. Olu was known to be from a noble family, his lineage tracing back to the founding families of Ife, yet whispers followed him wherever he went. He was said to be crippled, a man whose legs no longer worked, relegated to a life of limited mobility and reliance on others. But despite these rumors, Amma's family saw in him an opportunity, a way to climb higher on the social ladder and gain more influence within the village's leadership. Amma's resistance to the marriage was deep and genuine. The idea of marrying a man who could not even stand on his own filled her with dread. But her family's pressure was relentless. Her mother reminded her time and again that duty came before desire. The village could not afford to lose such an advantageous match. "You must do this for the family, Amma," her mother would say, her voice heavy with both love and expectation. "Your personal desires are secondary. This is about our future, about strengthening our bloodline and ensuring the prosperity of our village." Amma's internal battle was fierce. Her head told her to obey, to do what was expected, but her heart screamed for freedom, for a life beyond the confines of tradition. But there was no room for defiance in Ife, especially for a young woman. Her options were limited, marriage or being seen as a failure to her family. It felt like a choice between duty and dreams, and the weight of the decision pressed heavily on her shoulders. The news of Amma's upcoming marriage spread quickly through the village, and the gossip began. Whispers filled the air, carried from one house to another, from one ear to the next. Amma, the beauty of Ife, forced to marry that crippled man? The villagers couldn't help but discuss it. Some pitted Amma, claiming that she had been coerced into a union with a man she could never love. Others found amusement in the contrast between Amma's radiant beauty and Olu's crippled appearance. "She deserves so much more," they would say, but tradition is tradition. Amma's friends, though supportive, could not help but express their concerns. They too were caught in the tangled web of tradition. Some of them encouraged her to accept her fate with grace, while others openly criticized the match, wishing she could find someone who could truly offer her a life of happiness and fulfillment. Yet, beneath their words, the pressure to conform to the village's expectations was clear. In private, Amma would listen to her friends' concerns, their voices laced with sympathy, but also with an underlying fear. They too had seen how much she struggled, but no one dared to defy the traditions of the village. Amma was a woman, her voice, though strong, was not hers to command in a society so steeped in centuries-old customs. As Amma's wedding day drew closer, the divide between her inner turmoil and the expectations placed upon her grew more intense. The world around her buzzed with anticipation, but inside her heart, there was only fear. Fear that she was losing herself, that she was becoming nothing more than a pawn in a game she never agreed to play. Amma had never imagined that the day would come when her life would be so openly dissected, so unceremoniously laid bare before the entire village. It began with a formal announcement made by her father at the village square, as was customary in Ife. The moment he raised his voice, calling attention to the crowd of villagers, Amma felt a knot form in her stomach. The sound of her name being spoken in such a public way, followed by the words "engaged to Olu of the Ease family," was almost like a sharp blow to her chest. The villagers listened intently as Amma's father spoke of the match, detailing Olu's family lineage, the wealth and power that came with it, and the security it would offer Amma and her family. It was, on the surface, the ideal arrangement, one that any woman in the village would have eagerly accepted. And yet, as Amma stood behind her father, listening to the praise heaped upon the union, she felt a growing resentment well up within her. Her heart was a storm of emotions, helplessness, anger, and sorrow. The announcement was not a celebration for her, it was a reminder of how little agency she had in shaping her own future. It was a declaration of her fate, sealed without her consent, and there was nothing she could do to escape it. Amma had been raised to honor her family's wishes, to respect the traditions that had been handed down through generations. But inside, she felt like she was suffocating under the weight of expectations. She was a woman, her choices were not her own to make, and she had long learned that defying the will of her parents meant dishonor. As the villagers murmured their approval, Amma's thoughts raced. What would her life be like with a man she did not love? How could she spend her days in a marriage where she felt trapped, bound by duty instead of love? The thought of it twisted her stomach in knots, and yet she knew she had no choice. She was not just marrying Olu, she was marrying for her family's future, for their place in society, for the preservation of their name and status in the village. In that moment, Amma's dreams of freedom, of a life of her own choosing, seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving her standing in the shadow of a life she never asked for. The villagers reacted as expected. Some offered congratulations, others whispered their sympathy, their eyes filled with pity for Amma. The cruel reality of the situation was that most of them believed she was being forced into this marriage. It was said that Amma was beautiful, intelligent, and full of life, while Olu, despite his noble birth, was nothing more than a crippled man who could hardly walk without the aid of a cane. The whispers followed Amma wherever she went, and though she could not hear every word, she knew the general sentiment. They pitied her, but they also understood that she had no say in the matter. A woman's place was beside her husband, and that was the way it had always been in Ife. Amma had never seen Olu in person before, but when he finally arrived in the village, she saw him with her own eyes. He came on the back of a horse, his once proud posture now hunched as he struggled to dismount. The moment he placed his foot on the ground, Amma saw how he leaned heavily on a cane to steady himself. His legs were stiff, the once strong limbs of a nobleman now a reminder of his weakness. Despite his appearance, there was something undeniably dignified about him. His face was striking, with sharp features and deep-set eyes that seemed to observe everything around him with a quiet intensity. But it was the way he moved, with a hesitation that suggested he was used to being seen as less than he was, that made Amma's heart ache for him. Still, her resentment remained. The villagers, of course, had mixed reactions. Some stared in disbelief, while others exchanged sympathetic glances. Many believed that Amma had been forced into this arrangement out of obligation, not choice, and their pity for her was evident in their eyes. Amma, in turn, felt a growing discomfort, like she was being watched as some sort of tragic spectacle. Her heart ached, not just for the future that seemed to be closing in around her, but for the man who had become the unwilling center of it all. She could not help but wonder, how could she live the rest of her life with a man like him? A man who could barely stand without help, a man who needed others to do what should have come naturally to him. It was not what she had envisioned for her life, not even close. Their first meeting was a quiet affair, far from the grandiose celebration Amma's family had hoped for. Olu's presence in the room seemed to draw the air out of it, leaving behind an awkward silence. Amma stood before him, her posture stiff, her smile forced. She wanted to retreat, to run away, but she remained rooted to the spot by the weight of her family's expectations. "It is an honor to meet you, Amma," Olu said softly, his voice warm and steady, though tinged with a trace of sadness. Amma nodded politely, her lips curling into a thin smile. She wanted to speak, to say something that would show the depth of her turmoil, but the words caught in her throat. She watched him closely, noticing how his cane seemed to be an extension of him, how every step he took was deliberate, calculated. His eyes, however, held something she couldn't quite place, a depth, an intelligence that made her pause. He was not a fool, nor was he a man of arrogance. There was humility in him, and beneath that humility, Amma could sense something else, something that defied the way he appeared. But it did little to sway her. She had no desire to understand him. She had no desire to get closer to him. The engagement ceremony, though grand and full of traditional rituals, was little more than a parade of social expectations. Amma felt detached, isolated even as her family and the villagers gathered around to celebrate. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and burning incense, the beat of drums filling the air as dancers performed to honor the occasion. Amma's heart was not in it. She could barely hear the music, could barely see the faces around her. Everything felt distant, surreal, like she was watching her own life unfold from the outside. Olu, despite his physical limitations, participated fully in the rituals. His movements were slow, deliberate, but there was a grace in the way he approached each moment. He offered gifts to Amma's family, bowed deeply to the elders, and performed the symbolic gestures of respect that were expected of him. His respect was evident in every word he spoke, in every action he took. He was playing his part, just as Amma was playing hers. It was clear to her that he, too, was burdened by the weight of tradition, by the expectations that had been placed on him long before they ever met. Amma stood by, unable to connect with the others, feeling a growing sense of isolation in the midst of the celebration. The villagers looked on, some with admiration for her composure, others with a sense of pity for the life she was about to lead. But to Amma, none of it mattered. She felt as though she were drowning in a sea of tradition, with no way to break free. The engagement ceremony marked the beginning of her new life, one that she had not chosen, one that would be defined by duty and sacrifice. As the night wore on, the music and the festivities continued around her, but Amma's mind was elsewhere. She could not escape the thought of the life she was about to inherit, a life that would bind her to a man she did not love, to a future that was not her own. And in that moment, she realized that her fight for freedom, for agency, had only just begun. As the wedding day drew closer, the tension in Amma's heart became unbearable. The days felt like an endless countdown, each one dragging her deeper into a reality she hadn't chosen. Amma felt more like a prisoner than a bride-to-be, trapped in a life she had never asked for. The walls of her home seemed to close in on her with every passing day, the weight of her family's expectations pressing down harder than ever. There were moments, quiet and fleeting, when Amma allowed herself to dream of escape, of running away from the ceremony, from the entire arrangement. But those thoughts were always quickly silenced by the voice of duty that echoed in her mind. In the solitude of her room, Amma would often kneel and pray, her heart heavy with the burden of the life awaiting her. She spoke not just to the gods, but to herself, wondering why this was the path fate had carved for her. Why was she not allowed to make her own choices? Why was her happiness so irrelevant in the grand scheme of things? These moments of rebellion, however small, were the only times she felt a sense of control. She confided in a few close friends and maidens of the village, sharing her frustrations in whispered tones as they worked together preparing the wedding feast. "Why must we live like this?" she would ask, her voice full of the bitter sting of resignation. Her friends, though sympathetic, could offer little comfort, for they too were bound by the same traditions. On the eve of the wedding, Amma found herself standing before the mirror, staring at the reflection of the woman she had become, one who had surrendered her future to a family legacy that wasn't hers to begin with. Her wedding dress, a finely embroidered garment of gold and red, hung over her shoulders like a symbol of the life she could never have. It shimmered, but Amma could not see the beauty in it. The bright colors seemed to mock her, reminding her of the joy everyone else was feeling, joy that she could not share. The thought of the ceremony, the endless rituals, the eyes of the entire village upon her, made her feel nauseous. The day of the wedding arrived, and the village was alive with excitement. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut flowers and the rhythmic pounding of drums. People from all corners of the village gathered to witness the grand union, and the streets were alive with dancers and singers celebrating the occasion. The joy of the village was palpable, but Amma felt as if she were watching it all from behind a glass wall. The music, the laughter, the lively chatter, none of it reached her. It was as though she were standing outside of her own life, a spectator rather than a participant. The traditional attire worn by the villagers was breathtaking. The men wore bright, patterned robes, adorned with beads and gold, while the women were draped in elegant dresses of flowing fabric, their heads crowned with intricate beadwork. Amma herself was a vision of beauty, draped in a gown of deep crimson, her hair intricately braided and adorned with gold pins. She looked every bit the part of a bride, and yet, in her heart, she felt nothing but emptiness. The grand ceremony was a spectacle, a display of cultural pride, of tradition, of a family's honor. But for Amma, it was all a performance, a show for the villagers to witness while she was nothing more than an unwilling participant. Olu, for his part, behaved exactly as Amma had expected him to. He was quiet, respectful, and ever patient. As he stood by her side during the ceremony, he never once demanded attention for himself, despite the fact that he was the groom and the center of the event. He allowed the elders to speak, the music to play, the dancers to twirl around them without ever once trying to steal the spotlight. His demeanor was calm, serene even, as if he had accepted the role fate had given him. There was no arrogance in his posture, no bitterness in his eyes, only a quiet resignation that mirrored her own. As the ceremony continued, Amma's heart wavered between two extremes. On one hand, she resented the situation with all of her being. She loathed the way the villagers looked at her, the way they spoke of her as though she were a mere object to be passed between families. She resented the fact that this union, this marriage, was not about love, it was about duty, about tradition. And yet, there was something else, something far more complicated, stirring inside her. A curiosity she could not shake, a lingering thought that perhaps she had misjudged Olu. It happened during a quiet moment in the ceremony, when the music momentarily slowed and the dancers paused to catch their breath. Amma's eyes, usually focused on the ground, were drawn to Olu. There, in the dim light of the setting sun, she caught a glimpse of his eyes. They were calm, steady, and filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. They were not filled with anger or frustration, but with something deeper, something wiser. There was sorrow there too, though not the kind that would break a person. It was the kind of sorrow that came from accepting one's fate, from understanding the cruelty of the world without ever being bitter about it. For the first time, Amma found herself studying him in a way she hadn't before. His appearance, so fragile and so different from what she had expected, no longer seemed like an insurmountable obstacle. She had imagined him to be someone who would demand pity, someone who might grovel at her feet for the life she was being forced to give him. But that was not the man before her. Olu stood there, dignified, and though his body was weak, his spirit seemed unbroken. There was an inner strength in him, a quiet strength that called out to Amma, even though she refused to admit it. She was torn. Her heart, as much as she tried to suppress it, began to soften. Could it be possible that she had misjudged him all along? Was he not the weak, pitiful man she had assumed him to be? The briefest of glances from him sent a ripple through her chest, a tug she had not expected. For the first time, she wondered what it would be like to be with him, to speak to him without the barriers of resentment and fear. But those thoughts were fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the cold, harsh reality that her heart was not hers to follow. The elders gathered around them, reminding Amma, as they always did, of her duty to her family and to the village. They spoke of the importance of tradition, of maintaining the integrity of the family name, and of the roles she must play as a wife. These words, which she had heard 1,000 times before, felt like chains around her spirit. They were meant to keep her grounded, to remind her that there was no room for personal desires in her life. Yet, as Amma looked at Olu once more, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to him than she had allowed herself to see. The wedding ceremony was not just a joining of two people, it was the beginning of a journey, one she had not chosen, but one that was now hers to walk. Would she ever come to see Olu as more than just her duty? Would she learn to love him, as the elders promised she would, or would she remain trapped in a marriage of duty, forever yearning for a life of her own choosing? Only time would tell. The night was heavy with the weight of expectations, but for Amma, the looming wedding night felt more like an inevitable sentence than a celebration of union. She had anticipated this moment for months, but now that it had finally arrived, she was filled not with excitement or joy, but dread. The thought of spending the night with Olu, the man she had been forced to marry, left a bitter taste in her mouth. The very idea of it twisted her stomach into knots. How could she possibly find peace in a marriage to a man she did not love, especially one she had come to view as a crippled figure trapped in a body that didn't belong to him? Amma stood alone in the candlelit room that had been prepared for them, her reflection in the mirror a reminder of the night she never chose. She had bathed and adorned herself with the finest silks, the traditional attire for newlyweds, yet she felt none of the joy or excitement that should have accompanied such a night. Her heart was heavy, and her mind clouded with thoughts of what would come next. She feared a night of awkwardness, of strained conversation and forced intimacy. How could she ever be the woman she was expected to be in a marriage where her heart was not in it? Her body, though physically ready, felt like a foreign entity. Each step toward the bed felt as though she was walking toward her own doom. She was torn between rebellion and resignation, knowing that the customs of her village demanded she honor this union, yet unable to rid herself of the feeling of betrayal. How could her family have done this to her? How could she have been so blind to her own desires, her own dreams? It seemed too late now to turn back. But what happened next would shake her to her core. As Amma stood there, preparing to face the man she had married out of duty rather than love, something unexpected began to unfold before her. It started with the sound of a soft rustling behind her. Turning, she saw Olu standing in the doorway, his figure silhouetted against the dim glow of the oil lamps. His usual cane was nowhere in sight. Amma blinked, her mind too tired to process what was happening. Was it her imagination? She tried to dismiss the thought, but the truth hit her a moment later. Olu was standing. No longer hunched over, no longer crippled, but standing tall and confident. Amma's heart raced as she stared, her breath caught in her throat. Her first instinct was disbelief, then confusion, followed by a rising panic. This couldn't be real. Was she dreaming? Was this some cruel trick? She watched, frozen in place, as Olu's shoulders straightened and his posture shifted. The man she had married was not the man she had known. The transformation was gradual at first, and then it became undeniable. Olu was not the crippled man she had thought him to be. He was handsome, powerful, regal. He took a step forward, his bare feet making no sound against the floor. Amma's gaze followed him, her eyes wide, her chest tightening with every step he took. What was happening? Who was this man before her? Olu, now fully upright, began to speak, his voice calm but carrying an authority that was new and unfamiliar. Amma, he began, his words gentle yet carrying a deep weight of truth, I owe you an explanation. Amma's mind was spinning, trying to make sense of the man before her, trying to reconcile this new version of him with the image she had built in her head over the past weeks. Who are you? She whispered, her voice shaky with disbelief. What is this? What is happening? Olu's gaze softened, and he smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. I am Olu, the man you've married, and I am not what you think. He moved toward her slowly, his presence now undeniable, commanding the room. As Amma watched him, her thoughts began to race. Could this be real? Could it be that everything she had known was a lie? A sudden, sharp anger surged within her. Why hadn't he told her the truth sooner? Why had he deceived her? Why had he made her believe he was something he was not? Her chest tightened, and her voice trembled as she spoke. Why didn't you tell me? Why deceive me? I was forced into this marriage thinking you were. She trailed off, the anger and confusion bubbling to the surface. Olu's expression grew serious, and he took a deep breath. I was cursed, he said, his voice low. A wicked sorcerer placed a spell on me, one that forced me to live as a crippled man until I found a woman who would love me for who I truly am, not for what I could give her. Until then, I would remain in this form. Amma's eyes widened in shock, her mouth slightly agape. This was too much to comprehend. A curse? A sorcerer? It all sounded so fantastical, like something out of the stories she had heard as a child. And yet, looking at Olu now, she could see the truth in his eyes, a truth that reached deep into her soul. I had to hide my true identity, Olu continued, his voice steady. My noble lineage, my magical heritage, all of it had to remain a secret. It was a test, Amma. A test to see if you would love me for who I am beneath the surface, or if you would only see me for my wealth and title. The curse could only be lifted by a woman who truly loved me, not the man I appeared to be, but the man I am inside. Amma stood in stunned silence, the weight of his words sinking in slowly. Her mind was a blur of emotions, betrayal, confusion, awe, and something else she couldn't quite name. She felt as though the ground beneath her had shifted, and she was no longer certain of what was real and what had been a carefully constructed illusion. Had everything, from the moment she met Olu, been part of this grand ruse? Had she been set up, unknowingly, to play a part in a story far bigger than she could have ever imagined? Olu watched her closely, his expression softening. I know this is hard to understand. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But I did this for a reason, Amma. I needed to know if you could love me without knowing who I truly was. Amma's heart felt heavy in her chest. She had spent so long resenting him, condemning him for something that was beyond his control. She had misjudged him, yes, but now, as she stood before him, she could feel the weight of his vulnerability. The mix of emotions within her was overwhelming, betrayal and anger at the deception, but also a growing sense of admiration and compassion for this man who had suffered so much. For the first time, Amma saw Olu for who he truly was, not just the crippled man who had been forced into her life, but the noble, powerful prince who had hidden his true nature for her. In that moment, a strange understanding began to blossom in her heart. This was no longer just a test of her love, it was a test of her own character. Would she be able to look beyond the lies and see the truth? Would she be able to accept Olu for who he truly was, and not just the image she had created of him in her mind? The path before her was unclear, but for the first time since the wedding was arranged, Amma felt a sense of clarity. The night was not just about the beginning of a marriage, it was the beginning of something deeper, something she would have to learn to navigate. Love, sacrifice, and deception had all intertwined, and now Amma stood at the crossroads, ready to decide who she would become in this tale of love and destiny. Amma had never known a love so complicated, so layered, and so challenging. As the days passed, and she spent more time with Olu, she began to unravel the complexities of his true self. The man she had once seen as an unwilling partner in a marriage arranged for the sake of tradition was slowly becoming someone she could understand, and perhaps even trust. Their conversations were long and often deep, stretching well into the night as they sat together, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on the walls. Olu shared with her stories of his past, of the trials he had endured under the curse that had bound him for so many years. He spoke of the years he spent hiding, of watching life pass him by while he waited for someone to look beyond his physical form and see the man he truly was. His voice was filled with a quiet strength, and as Amma listened, she began to understand the depth of his pain. Olu's words were never heavy-handed or self-pitying. Instead, they were a quiet confession, revealing the wisdom and resilience he had gained through years of hardship. He spoke of the importance of understanding others, of seeing beneath the surface, and of how love could not be based on appearances alone. These lessons were not lost on Amma, who had spent so much of her life judging people by the roles they were assigned in society. In turn, Amma began to open up to Olu in ways she never had with anyone. She shared her own struggles, her frustrations with the expectations placed on her by her family and village. She talked about the weight of tradition and how it had suffocated her dreams of a life of her own making. Olu listened patiently, never interrupting, never offering solutions, but instead offering understanding. He made her feel as though her thoughts and feelings mattered, that she was not just a pawn in the games of others. With each passing day, the emotional distance between them shrank. The resentment that had once poisoned Amma's heart toward Olu began to dissipate, replaced by a growing respect for the man who had endured so much in silence. She saw him not just as the prince who had been cursed, but as an equal, someone with strength, wisdom, and a quiet nobility that was far more impressive than the title he bore. The bond between them strengthened, and Amma found herself slowly falling for him, not just because of his transformation, but because of the man he was beneath the surface. She admired his integrity, his gentleness, and his willingness to teach her the things she never knew she needed to learn. They spent hours talking about leadership, about the future of their village, and about how they could build a life together that was both fulfilling and just. Amma began to see her role as more than just a wife. She saw herself as a partner, someone with the power to shape their future. Olu shared his knowledge with Amma, teaching her the intricacies of ruling the land, the delicate balance between justice and mercy, and the importance of remaining true to oneself. His lessons were not just about governance, but about life itself. He showed Amma how to navigate the complexities of their world with grace, wisdom, and compassion. Slowly, Amma began to see herself as not just a bride, but as a woman with purpose, someone who had the power to make a difference in her village. As Amma's confidence grew, so did her sense of duty. She took an active role in the changes that were taking place in the village, working alongside Olu to implement new policies and initiatives that would improve the lives of the villagers. Together, they began to revitalize the land, encouraging the people to embrace innovation while still honoring their traditions. Amma worked tirelessly, learning how to be both a leader and a nurturer, balancing the needs of her people with her own evolving sense of self. The villagers, at first, had been skeptical of their union, unsure of how to reconcile the rapid changes with their long-held beliefs. Many still whispered about Olu's sudden recovery, wondering if it had been a trick or a sign of something unnatural. Some traditionalists in the village questioned Amma's quick acceptance of Olu, seeing it as a sign of weakness or a betrayal of their customs. The village was divided, with some embracing the changes brought about by the couple, while others resisted them. Tensions ran high as some villagers began to voice their concerns openly. They questioned the legitimacy of the marriage, believing that Amma had been duped by Olu's false appearance. They whispered that the curse had never truly been lifted, and that the prince's true nature had been hidden all along. These voices of doubt were loud, and they began to spread throughout the village, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and division. Amma felt the weight of these criticisms, and at times, the pressure threatened to break her newfound confidence. She could feel the eyes of the villagers on her whenever she walked through the streets with Olu, and the whispers followed them like a shadow. But with each passing day, she grew stronger. She remembered the lessons Olu had taught her about the importance of seeing beyond the surface, about the power of love and trust. She knew that their union was not just about appearances, it was about something deeper, something that transcended the superficial judgments of others. Together, Amma and Olu worked to prove to the village that their love was real, that their partnership was built on mutual respect and understanding. They continued to implement the changes they believed would improve the village's future, always listening to the concerns of the people while pushing forward with their vision. Slowly but surely, they began to win the trust of the villagers. People saw the positive changes that were taking place in the village, new crops being cultivated, better trade routes, and a growing sense of unity among the people. As their relationship deepened, so did their commitment to one another and to their village. They learned to balance the expectations of their society with their own values. Amma learned how to be both a wife and a leader, and Olu discovered that love could be just as powerful as the wisdom he had gained from his trials. They faced obstacles together, learning to trust each other more deeply with every challenge they overcame. In the quiet moments, when the world outside seemed to fade away, Amma and Olu would sit together, their hearts full of understanding and mutual respect. The emotional tension that had once defined their relationship had been replaced by a sense of harmony, a sense that they were stronger together than they could ever be apart. They were no longer two individuals bound by tradition and circumstance, but a true partnership, one that would shape the future of their village and their lives. As the seasons passed, the villagers began to see the fruits of Amma and Olu's efforts. The once skeptical members of the community slowly began to change their views, their hearts and minds softened by the prosperity that had taken root under the couple's leadership. It wasn't just the tangible improvements that they saw, new crops flourishing, trade routes expanding, the economy growing, but also the subtle, almost intangible changes that Amma and Olu had brought to the village. There was a renewed sense of hope, a new belief that perhaps change, when led by love and trust, could be for the better. The villagers, who once whispered behind closed doors about the legitimacy of Olu's recovery and Amma's seemingly sudden acceptance of him, began to see the depth of their bond. No longer was their relationship seen as a mere contract or a marriage of convenience. The love between Amma and Olu was no longer hidden in the shadows, it was out in the open, thriving, and it began to inspire those around them. People saw how the two of them worked side by side, how they shared in each other's triumphs and burdens, and they realized that this was a love built not just on appearances or wealth but on mutual respect, understanding, and a shared vision for the future. The whispers of doubt grew quieter, replaced by murmurs of admiration. The people of the village began to admire Amma not just for her beauty but for her strength and wisdom. They saw her as a leader in her own right, someone who had not only accepted her husband for who he truly was but who had also taken on the challenge of transforming their community. Similarly, Olu, once seen as a crippled prince, was now regarded as a wise and capable leader, a man who had overcome adversity and earned the respect of the very people who had once doubted him. Together, they had proven that love could overcome even the deepest obstacles, and they had inspired their village to embrace new ways of thinking. Amma and Olu's story, as time went on, became a legend. It was passed down through the generations, a powerful folktale that spoke of love, trust, and the importance of seeing beyond what the eyes can perceive. The story of their marriage, once seen as an unusual and controversial union, had become a symbol of hope and transformation. parents told their children about the power of love and the importance of building relationships on a foundation of trust. They spoke of the lessons that Amma and Olu had learned, the lesson that true love was not about wealth or beauty, but about character, sacrifice, and loyalty. The villagers, now a community bound together not just by blood but by shared values, looked to Amma and Olu's legacy as a guiding light. As Amma sat with Olu one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she reflected on how far she had come. It seemed like a lifetime ago that she had stood at the altar, resentful and uncertain, thinking of her marriage as a fate to endure rather than a life to embrace. She had once felt trapped by her family's expectations, torn between the duty to honor them and the desire to forge her own path. But now, as she sat beside her husband, her heart full of love and gratitude, she understood the deeper meanings of sacrifice, honor, and love. Amma thought about the trials she had faced, the confusion she had felt in the beginning, and the painful journey she had taken from resistance to acceptance. She thought about her initial feelings of anger, her belief that she had been forced into this marriage, and how those feelings had been replaced by a growing admiration for the man she had once resented. The love she had for Olu had evolved into something more profound than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just about the man she had married, but about the person she had become through their relationship. She had learned that true love was not easy, it was not always about fairy tales or magical transformations. It was about trust, vulnerability, and the willingness to grow together. Olu had taught her more than she could have ever hoped to learn. Through his quiet strength, his patience, and his wisdom, he had shown her that love was not a destination but a journey, one that required understanding, sacrifice, and faith. It was through him that she had discovered what it truly meant to be a partner, not just in marriage but in life. She thought about the early days of their relationship, how they had built their foundation on mutual respect and understanding, and how it had flourished into something truly beautiful. The pain of their early struggles now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a deep sense of fulfillment and peace. Amma's transformation was not just a personal one, it had extended to the village. The people who had once viewed her with skepticism now saw her as a leader in her own right, someone who had learned from her experiences and used that knowledge to guide her people toward a brighter future. They saw her as wise and strong, a woman who had faced adversity with courage and who had used her intelligence and compassion to bring about real change. She had grown into a role she had never imagined for herself, and in doing so, she had transformed not just her own life but the lives of those around her. Olu, too, had changed. The man who had once been hidden beneath a cloak of mystery and uncertainty was now fully revealed, his strength, intelligence, and kindness shining through. He was no longer just a prince in name, but a leader who had earned the respect of his people. The curse that had once defined him had been lifted, and in its place stood a man whose worth was measured not by his title or appearance but by his character and actions. Together, they had created a legacy, one of love, trust, and transformation. They had shown the villagers that true beauty was not about outward appearances, but about what lay beneath the surface. Their love had been tested by time and circumstance, and it had come out stronger for it. It was a love built on trust, respect, and a shared commitment to building a future together. As Amma and Olu continued to lead their village, they knew that their journey was far from over. There would always be challenges to face, obstacles to overcome, but they also knew that they had the strength and the wisdom to face whatever came their way. They had learned to trust each other, to lean on each other, and to believe in the power of love. And in the end, that was all they truly needed. The village, once filled with doubt and skepticism, now stood as a testament to the power of love and transformation. Amma and Olu's story, told and retold through the generations, would continue to inspire those who heard it to look beyond the surface and to trust in the power of love to change lives. It was a story that transcended time, a story of sacrifice, redemption, and the enduring strength of the human heart. The village had changed, but so had Amma and Olu. They had not only transformed themselves, but they had also transformed the world around them.